Hi, folks. Welcome back. Dennis Vitoza, also known as Jeff Noodles, and we're back today. We're going to be talking about Supergirl and the disaster that this movie has been since we last checked in on it. Opening weekend is over, and needless to say, the projections ended up being even worse than anybody could have ever anticipated. According to Discussing Film, Supergirl ended up with a lower than expected opening weekend of just $37.1 million. That's actually a lower opening than Joker 2, famously one of the biggest bombs in DC history, and one of the worst movies ever made, arguably. And making a comparison for comparison's sake, Joker 2 was so bad, folks, that it literally repelled people from going to watch the sequel to one of the most popular Joker movies ever made. People were so thoroughly annoyed and disgusted that they just skipped it altogether. Nobody wanted to watch that movie. Needless to say, there were obviously a lot of conspiracy theories about whether or not Joker 2 was intentionally made by DC to fail, but we're not actually going to dive into that because we know Supergirl was not intentionally made to be bad. In fact, Warner Brothers very much believed this movie was going to knock it out of the park, so much so that they had their lead actress going around talking like the movie didn't even have to make any money.
I have many queer friends, so honestly, I'm kind of honored. I'm honored that that's happening. But I think because she doesn't live inside the binary of what we think a woman should be, that is what makes her so special and so exciting and so new.
Here's the thing. Most dudes are just thoroughly annoyed by this ditzy fembot actress archetype that Hollywood keeps trying to just shove down our throats. Can we go back to an era of the elegant actress? Someone who has poise and knows how to talk about something other than the fifth wave feminist talking points. I mean, is it too much to ask for somebody who isn't going to politicize everything and instead just talks like a normal human being you want to actually have a conversation with? I think that's what most people, not even just guys, most people in general who are looking to watch a superhero movie are actually looking for when they purchase their tickets. Now, let's be honest, who is this supposed to appeal to? Like a 12-year-old? I don't think anybody who's actually buying tickets to this garbage is looking at that sort of statement from this actress and saying, hey, yeah, I want my daughter to go watch a bisexual superhero whose main skill is eating box and fighting herpes. It's just also completely disconnected from reality and from what the average moviegoer is looking for. I don't even know where to begin anymore, but these people will never understand until they start taking hits because, needless to say, it's no surprise that Variety reported at the end of the weekend that Supergirl braces for a $100 million loss. What DC Studios should learn from its box office bomb. $100 million, folks. That's how much money they stand to lose. $100 million. And it's really not a surprise when you actually look at the content. You look at the memes of things that are going around online, the music choices that feel so incongruent with what's actually playing out on the screen. I mean, it all adds up. In fact, that's one of the things Variety alludes to. They write, in Supergirl, a melodramatic cover of Jimmy Eat World's The Middle scores a climactic battle scene with the song's lyrics meant to offer encouragement to the plucky heroine. Hey, don't write yourself off yet. Look, folks, I'm not even joking about this. It is so thoroughly embarrassing. It actually became a meme online. People are replacing action scenes with a horrible melodramatic song, and the result is just beyond ridiculous and somewhat amusing if you like to laugh at cringe.
It just takes some time to penetrate in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything's gonna be alright.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I can show because of copyright reasons, but you get the idea. It is an utterly ridiculous and dumb choice, to say the least. And by the way, it's become a trend to goof on this awful creative choice by taking classic violent action scenes from the past, from other movies, and swapping in the song from Supergirl and posting the edits to X just to show how completely ridiculous it all looks. The clip we just watched was one of those edits. It wasn't actually from Supergirl. It was from the latest Superman movie. The whole point is to demonstrate just how badly this type of music clashes with serious action scenes. And honestly, it proves the point perfectly. And look, I'm sure the Supergirl producers were going for some kind of Martin Scorsese style incongruence, right? You know, like in Goodfellas, where they're shooting people up and You've got these happy, upbeat 1950s bops playing in the background. There's an intentional level of incongruence in that choice by Martin Scorsese. The difference is that Scorsese is also using those songs to illustrate the time period and who those characters were. Those guys were running nightclubs, having fun in their off time, and living this glamorous criminal lifestyle. There's actual context that is added by the music. The music is tied to the era, the setting, and the characters. Goodfellas was made in the 90s, but it's depicting the 50s and beyond, so there's a logical connection between the song choice, the time, the place, and the activity. Yes, the incongruence is jarring to the viewer, but that's the point. It serves the story. In this case, it just looks dumb. It looks stupid. It feels like something that's meant to sanitize the heroism that is being displayed and the violence on the screen. Needless to say, that's why it doesn't work. That's why it ends up becoming a parody of itself. You try to inject this upbeat feminist energy into scenes where the hero has to kill thousands of people in order to save a planet or a city, and it just doesn't work. There's nothing feminine, there's nothing dainty about having to smash somebody's face in. I think it goes without saying that there's a reason why these scenes are usually scored with tense, dark, brooding music. These aren't easy things that are being done by the hero. They're difficult, selfless acts carried out by a hero in order to save innocent people. To add this kind of levity to it is just, what are you doing? It reads like an SNL parody starring Andy Samberg. Anyway, speaking of parodies, this couldn't get any worse because there was a post that went viral over the weekend from Chris Gore that we're looking at right now. He said, on Monday at an AMC theater, I witnessed a worker taking apart the Supergirl standee to put the remains in the trash. This was after the movie's first weekend. Now, why is this notable, folks? Well, because typically these sorts of displays stay up as long as the movie is still playing and bringing people into theaters. Why? Well, because they remind people the movie is out. They help sell tickets. And by the way, these things rarely ever end up in the trash. You know why? Because if people actually like the movie, they come back and ask if they can take the standee home as a collector's item. There are movie buffs out there, folks. People collect these sorts of things. None of the movie buffs wanted this one. Why is that? Just ask yourselves, folks. The answer is right in front of you, my friends. Anyway, back to the Variety article, which actually supports this thesis. They write, the Warner Brothers and DC Studios adaptation, which centers on Superman's cousin Kara Zor-el, misfired with $37.1 million in North America and $62.6 million globally in its opening weekend. Monday's final tally was below Sunday's estimate of $38 million domestically and $68 million worldwide. After launching below expectations, the big-budget film is shaping up to be a money loser for the studio, as well as a major setback for the newly rebooted DC Universe. They continue, Warner Brothers and DC spent $170 million to produce and roughly $120 million to market the comic book adventure. That's $290 million, folks. $290 million spent on a movie that has been just absolutely imploding. But when you start looking at the signs of what actually happened, why this movie became such an unbelievable failure, all you have to do is look at the people making the movie, because when you look at the writer, you finally start understanding exactly why this movie went so wrong. And I'll tell you why. According to Kaguya's top gal, the writer for Supergirl literally only had a short film on her resume before getting this job. She was hired because of nepotism and her gender, a clear example of why DEI hiring is hurting the quality of the product. That's not even an exaggeration by Kaguya, by the way. That's actually a pretty accurate take when you think about it. The person they hired had written virtually nothing before this. And when you hear her talk about the project, she was basically making stuff up instead of actually following the comic or any sort of thing that comic books actually have. When you try to reinvent the wheel instead of respecting the source material, this is what ends up happening. It goes completely off the rails. Now, needless to say, with this awful outlook for the movie, the Coat Fest is already underway. According to Discussing Film, Peter Safran made a statement about Supergirl underperforming at the box office, saying, while Supergirl didn't meet our box office expectations, it's just one component of a broader long-term strategy at DC Studios that we remain confident in. If your strategy is to keep losing money, then I say good luck, my friend. Good luck running a business, a money-losing business. And of course, the online responses were exactly what you would expect. People appealing to identity instead of actually addressing the substantive issues surrounding the movie. One of the more popular takes was that this somehow had to do with the lead character's gender. One tweet in particular stood out to me. It said, "It feels more and more clear that the hatred at movies like Supergirl, Captain Marvel, etc. isn't about the movies. It's about the lead character having two X chromosomes. This should be a lens through which the response to the Star Wars sequel trilogy is viewed." Now, that framing is somewhat bizarre because there have been female action heroes for decades. There was Nikita, there was the female lead in The Americans, then there was the Star Wars sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker, with Daisy Ridley playing Rey, as you mentioned here. Collectively, the Star Wars trilogy grossed over $4.4 billion worldwide. And guess what? None of those movies were centered around the character's gender. People love to bring up Captain Marvel or other movies like Supergirl that underperformed while conveniently ignoring the counterexamples. Within the very same Marvel universe, in fact, you had Ant-Man and Wasp, one of Marvel's most popular films. Yes, it had two leads. But my point is that audiences are not inherently resistant to female heroes. They are resistant, though, to female heroes who inject politics into the character or inject sexuality unnecessarily into the character when it has nothing to do with the story. People don't want to watch that. Just very clear cut. No dad or mom out there, for that matter, wants to know that the character they're going to take their children to go watch eats box, okay? Nobody cares. Nobody's buying a ticket because Supergirl can just stick some Velcro, okay? Nobody's paying for that crap. They want to see her kick ass. And look, that said, just think about this from the perspective of a parent. If a father hears that there's any sort of sexual messaging attached to a movie, then he's probably not going to bring his children to it. He doesn't want to spend the ride home answering questions about why Supergirl is bisexual. And by the way, that applies to mothers as well. Parents want to take their kids to watch a superhero movie. That's the expectation. It's not that crazy, okay? But you can't teach these Hollywood folks. They're so thoroughly captured by their political ideology that they can't even have a moderately reasonable conversation over this kind of crap. Everything has to come back to gender because they're incapable of any sort of self-reflection, self-awareness, or taking meaningful criticism without viewing it as a personal attack on their identity. The New York Times, by the way, unsurprisingly, was also guilty of this sort of framing after Supergirl underperformed. They suggested that female-led superhero movies have been rejected almost uniformly over the last 5 years because perhaps reflecting a resurgence of misogyny among the large male audience. Well, how about this, New York Times? How about you just give people what they're asking for? How about Hollywood stop trying to shove these feminist narratives down everybody's throats? People just want to watch a superhero kick ass. It's not really that complicated. They don't care whether it's a woman or a man. This is a superhero movie. It doesn't have to be realistic. Just give people compelling characters, good action scenes, and an entertaining story from beginning to end. They want a roller coaster ride. They don't care who the captain is. Anyway, there was also a response from Warner Brothers executives that later leaked online and got thoroughly ratioed. Superman Saga News reported on X that executives said, "We were surprised by both the ferocity of the backlash and its reach, believing the culture had evolved past the sort of campaign. Hey, guess what? Maybe don't have your lead actress spend the entire press tour saying she's intentionally trying to piss off the very audience that's supposed to buy tickets for your movie that you spent over $100 million on. Then maybe you won't be surprised by the backlash. How about opening your ears to the audience instead of getting shocked by what they're saying afterwards?" And look, let me explain something to you folks. I live in Los Angeles, as most of you know. I've met plenty of these people. The reality is they live inside a bubble, a microscopic bubble. They genuinely cannot fathom that normal audiences might think differently from them. That's why they keep making products like this. And I'll even be a little gracious here. I don't think they're deliberately trying to fail. I think they're so thoroughly captured by their own leftist woke ideology and have such a myopic worldview that they literally cannot see beyond it. They're like horses walking around with blinders on. They're clearly not doing enough audience testing or focus groups in the places that actually matter to understand what people want when they buy tickets to these sorts of movies. Instead, they just shoehorn their ideology into the product and assume audiences will accept it because it's attached to a famous brand like Superman. To put it bluntly, this is like trying to sell an inverted toaster with the heating elements on the outside and expecting people to buy it simply because it's called a toaster. No, nobody wants a toaster that's going to burn their hands. Likewise, nobody wants to spend upwards to $70 or even higher in some places for a night at the movies just to sit through 2 hours of being preached at about feminism and wokeism, watching some bizarre version of a beloved character that now for some reason eats box and is drunk. Okay, nobody wants that in this economy. And for all the feminist lip service these executives and publications keep giving, you'd think they'd at least compensate the lead actress accordingly. Because according to Culture Crave, Millie Alcock reportedly made around $400,000 to star in the lead role of this movie. That cost well over $100 million to produce. $400,000. That's a bargain for the studio. Honestly, if I were Millie Alcock, I'd be upset that my name was attached to a movie that bombed like this and all I got was $400,000. You can't even buy a home in Los Angeles for that money. You can't even put a decent down payment on one for that matter. She probably had to take the flight straight back to London afterward because she couldn't even afford to live in this city where the movie was produced. Now, obviously, they could have made it in Atlanta, so maybe the housing was cheaper. I don't know. At this point, so many people have moved to Atlanta, it's probably the same price as Los Angeles. But my point is, where did the other $100 million go? Because it certainly didn't go on the writing or the production of this movie. Looks like trash. We all know this. I already said it. We'll keep saying it because it is. Anyway, the only good thing that really came out of this movie were the memes. There are countless AI-generated memes all over the internet and on X. I've got one playing right next to me right now. And I'm not going to show you the whole thing because honestly, it's all pretty cringe, okay? Even the memes are cringe. A lot of them make her look like a Neanderthal by exaggerating Millie Alcock's appearance. And whether you think she's attractive or not is all beside the case. It's all beside the point, okay? That's really not the issue that I have or I think most people have with this. The issue is the movie itself. I genuinely hope these studios get back on track. I really do, honestly. I understand they have their own worldview. They have their own ideology and their own vision for how society should operate, and that's fine. But if your goal is to actually sell movie tickets, this approach clearly isn't working. You're not going to get an entire audience to adopt your politics just because you put a giant S on someone's chest and surround them with CGI. Just make good movies again. We're begging you. That's all people want. People want to buy your tickets. The fact that this movie is so bad and it still made $40 million despite how bad it is, I think tells you how much audiences are willing to give these bad movies a chance. They're willing to torture themselves to watch this trash. You couldn't pay me to sit through it. I couldn't even make it through 10 seconds of the trailer. But clearly, people want this kind of garbage. So just do them a favor and give them what they're begging you for. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. I hope you have a terrific day. Peace.